Hello everyone, welcome to the Teaching English webinar for teacher educators. My name is Shirin and I'll be your moderator today. Thank you all so much for joining this live event. This session with Alan Maley explores how teacher educators and teachers can develop lifelong learning beyond the training room. As usual, before we start the session, I would like to share a number of quick housekeeping reminders with you. While waiting, please share with us in the Q&A where you are from. If you work in pre-service teacher education, type pre-service. If you work in in-service, type in-service in the Q&A. This session is being recorded, and a recording of the webinar will be available on the Teaching English website in the next couple of days. The link to the certificate will be provided in the thank you email that you'll receive tomorrow. Finally, you'll have a chance to ask questions during the session. Please use the Q&A to ask our presenter your questions. We'll be using the chat for announcements. Let me introduce our presenter. So, Alan Maley has been involved in language education for over 60 years. He worked for the British Council for 28 years as English language officer in former Yugoslavia, Ghana, Italy, France, China, and as director South India. He was director of the Bell Educational Trust, Cambridge, then senior fellow at the National University, Singapore, and Dean of the Institute for English Language Education, Assumption University, Bangkok. He has published over 50 books and numerous articles. His main interests are in creative methodology, teacher education, and ecological approaches to language learning as an agent of change. He is now actively retired. And Ellen is with us now. Hello, Ellen.
Hello, everybody.
Over to you. Welcome. Great to see you.
Thank you very much. Okay. Fine. So I'm going to talk for a little while, and then I will put up some questions, and you'll have a chance to ask then, and we will either answer them then or at the end when there will be more questions. Okay. So could I have the first slide, please? Yeah, I started off with this. I was struck by this a couple of years ago when I was attending a webinar that one of the teachers who just finished, I think, her CELTA, said this, now I've finished my teacher training, I know how to teach, but I still don't know how to be a teacher. And that actually got me thinking about what it is that teachers are and do. So could we have the next slide, please? Yeah, so I thought, what is it that teachers, good teachers, whatever good means, are or do? And it seemed to me that there are three main areas that they demonstrate their goodness. One is knowledge, which I call the matter. Obviously, you need to know a certain number of things if you're going to teach them. We don't want to be taught by, ignoramuses. So you need a knowledge of the language. You need knowledge of the history of the language, of the history of the teaching of the language. You need a knowledge about psychology and so on and so forth. You also need skills, classroom skills of various kinds, organizational skills, getting feedback. How do you do all of these things? So that's the method. And of course, our profession has gone through a large number of these methods over time. I think English language teaching is one of those professions where we are always looking for a new idea. And sometimes these ideas are good and sometimes they're not so good. But anyway, they're all concerned with the method. And then the third corner of the triangle is what I call attitudes, the manner in which you do things, because this, it seems to me, is perhaps one of the keys to successful teaching and learning. It's not simply what you know or how skillful you are. We can all think of teachers who knew a lot and were very skillful, but we didn't like them very much. Or perhaps we found that their way of teaching, their attitude, their manner didn't suit us. So if we could just look at the next slide. I started to think about this, as you can see, some time ago. I did 2 surveys. I won't call this research because it's not scientific research. I don't do scientific research, but I did do inquiry. And I did 1 survey in 2010 and another survey, which I repeated the same survey in 2022 with a different set of subjects. And all I asked people to do was to think about a teacher that they remembered with affection or with respect, or because they were very memorable as teachers. And why was it that they remembered them in this way? So quite interestingly, could I have the next slide, please? The key words that came out of these responses, I grouped into 5 categories. And this is the first one, ethics. And these were key words that came up repeatedly. Things like they were challenging, they were strict, but they were honest, and they were just, and they were fair. We all like to be treated fairly. They were reliable. You know, they weren't inconsistent, and they treated us all equally. Things like that. These are all ethical issues, and interestingly, these were some of those important qualities that were mentioned. The next slide shows keywords 2, professionalism. So these teachers were knowledgeable, they were competent, they were dedicated, they loved their subject, they were well organized, well informed, they gave good explanations, you know, not lazy. Interesting. They were practical. All of these things have to do with the professional aspects of the teaching act. The third one, the next slide, related to what I called humanity, for want of a better word. They were kind, they were friendly, they were generous, they were present. Interesting, we'll come to that in a minute. They were sensitive, understanding, they were patient, very important quality. They were warm and respectful. Gives us time, I like that one. Sees us. You know, they acknowledged the persons that they were teaching. They were compassionate. They understood that their students had problems, sympathetic. Okay. So those were another bunch of attributes. The fourth one had to do with presence. Now, what is presence? Well, presence is basically being there, completely confident, natural authority. You know, the kind of teacher that you go into the classroom and you think, I'm in a safe pair of hands here. This man knows what he's doing, or this woman knows what she's doing. They were elegant, they were poised, open-minded. I'll touch on this again in a minute. They had an authority. And it even went over into physical aspects of their presence, their interesting appearance, the fact that they had a deep voice or a nice voice, that they were a storyteller, those kinds of things. So presence is very important. And incidentally, there's a book by Patsy Rodenberg. Patsy Rodenberg was, until very recently, the voice coach at the Central School of Drama in London, and the voice coach for the Royal Shakespeare Company. And she has a great deal to say about presence and how you can develop your presence. So I will touch on that again in a minute. Okay, keywords 5. Sorry, yep. Okay, here we are. Charisma, and that's in a way a very cheap term, I suppose, charisma, but I think we know what we mean by it. These were teachers who inspired, who were innovative and creative, who were passionate about what they were doing, that brought things alive. They helped us by motivating us, giving us a chance to try things for ourselves, engaging us in the teaching and learning act. And they were, as people, they had wide interests. They weren't just narrow pedagogues, and they were open to new ideas. So all of these things added up to what I call charisma. Okay, could we have the next slide, please? So having looked at these survey results, I thought, what does teacher training do? Well, teacher training is necessary. It prepares future teachers with the knowledge and skills that they need. So knowledge of the language and theories of learning and everything that I mentioned just now, skills, organizational skills, personal skills, pedagogical skills, and so on. Those two things it does. Now, these are necessary. I'm not saying knowledge and skills are not important, they are, but they're not sufficient alone for the reality of what happens in the classroom. So if we could have the next slide, please. So, yeah. So there are basically things that you can train and things that have to be developed. But some things you can teach, other things have to be learned. And that's a very critical difference for me. So technical preparation, knowledge and skills, the matter and the method, those are important. They can be trained. They have to do with prediction and control. I mean, the assumption in many training courses is that if you know how to do a good lesson plan, then you will do a good lesson. And we all know that that doesn't necessarily happen. It's all about prediction and control. We try, when we plan something, we are predicting that we will be in control of it. And this is all about thinking on paper. It's about planning. Some people call this the map, the training, which is not the same thing as when the match takes place. And it's interesting, there's a quotation from Toscanini, who was a very famous orchestral conductor, who once was rehearsing his orchestra, and he said, "Don't just play the notes, play the music." So there is a difference then between what must be developed, which is a psychological preparedness, dealing with attitudes, authenticity, atmosphere, manner, and reactivity and acceptance of what actually happens in the classroom, thinking on your feet rather than thinking on paper. So I like to keep these two things, if you keep these in mind, that some things can be trained, other things have to be learned. And there is a difference between teaching and learning. Okay, could we have the next slide, please? I thought it might be interesting just to touch on this. Rod Belitho recently gave a very interesting webinar for an organization in Slovakia, talking about the principles of humanistic teaching and learning. And this is the list that he came up with. Notice the importance of things like active listening, affect, feeling, authenticity, being who you are, being yourself, present in the classroom, giving choice, not simply laying down everything that has to be done, empathizing with the students, understanding what are the problems that they are experiencing, allowing and encouraging exploration and discovery rather than direct input, giving learners a chance to exercise autonomy. And all of these things, positive attitudes, self-esteem, starting where your learners are, and the teacher's role being seen as a facilitator rather than as a director. Now, okay, if you're going to do these things, I suggest that you need to pay a lot more attention to that third corner of the triangle, attitudes and manner, because unless you're tuned in that way, you're not going to be able to do these things. They don't sit well with a rigid training paradigm. Okay, could we have the next slide? I think just a few quotations here. Earl Stevick, very well known, a very old friend, unfortunately no longer with us. Success depends less on materials, techniques, and linguistic arrangements, and more on what goes on inside and between the people in the classroom. What the teacher is more important than what he teaches. And this nice one from Theodore Roosevelt: they don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And for most of us, this is me, the last one, what we remember most about our teachers is not their technical expertise, but their human qualities. I'd ask people to think about this before attending this workshop. So I hope this webinar, so I hope maybe that you have recalled some of your own teachers and remembered the kinds of things, the human qualities that made them so memorable. I have a number of teachers that I remember with great affection and also with great respect. And not just because I had a teacher of French, for example. I don't remember him only because he spoke very good French, as I now realize, but he cared deeply about what he was doing, and he cared deeply about whether we learnt or not. And those are the kinds of things that I remembered about him. Could we move on, please? And there are some more. Chaucer had it right: this life so short, the craft so long to learn. We never stop learning. If we're truly engaged, we don't stop learning. Every day something comes along that can stimulate us to learn more if we have the right mindset. And the other ones you can read for yourself. Dewey, for example, and Kraft. So we need, according to Kraft anyway, we need to go on knowing more about ourselves as teachers and as people, obviously, and nourishing ourselves, which means, for me anyway, getting more information that is of interest to me, more experiences which feed into my own past experience and help me to develop. Okay, so could we have, I think it's the questions now. Yeah, so we'll just take about 5 minutes. Sirin, I think there are three, I mean, you can ask any questions you like, but I'm suggesting that these are three things that maybe you might like to think about. So just about 5 minutes for this.
We have already received lots of questions, Alan. While our colleagues are thinking, I'd like to ask some of these. And Anne has a comment, Mr. Maley: I'm really impressed with the content of your presentation. I have a question in mind. How is teacher professionalism, including predefined standards of becoming a teacher, defined in different cultures? And how does this impact a teacher's teaching practice?
Well, that's a very big question, isn't it? I will try and answer it very, very quickly. I've worked in a largish number of countries for longish periods. And obviously the culture in its widest sense does impact on the way that that training is conceived and in the way that teachers are viewed. So obviously you can't afford to neglect that. But on the other hand, there are universals, I think. And those universals are the ones that I've been talking about. And the results of my survey, for example, I surveyed people from a very wide range of countries and situations. And these are kind of common features. So I think there is underlying all of this. Okay, the training may be slightly different. The view of the teacher-learner relationship in the classroom may be different. But underlying all of this, there are these fundamentals, which I think we should not ignore.
Thank you, Alan. About the different aspects of teachers' roles, Vaisna is asking from Cambodia. I'm an English teacher in an Islam community. I'm facing that. It's hard for me to understand about children at that place. And I want to listen from your advice to be a good teacher or be as friends. So what do you think about these two aspects of teachers' role? So as a friend and professionalism. Teacher is a friend and teacher is a professional.
Yes, I would like to, this question of being a friend. I think I wrote a kind of a poem, which I will probably use in the follow-up session, but I've got here, one of the lines in the poem is, to be friendly without being pally. In other words, friendliness does not mean, getting up close and personal necessarily. You can be friendly without going over the top. And I think it's very difficult if you become too closely friendly with your students, then the relationship is not always very healthy. And of course, in a case like that, you would probably find yourself being more friendly with certain such students and not so friendly with others. And that doesn't wear very well. So I think you have to, I can't give you direct advice on this, but my feeling is that you have to be obviously open and you're listening to your students. In that sense, you're friendly, but you don't necessarily have to be, friendly in their pocket, as it were. That would be my advice. You're in Cambodia, but are you Cambodian?
We don't know. So we'll see. We'll find out more maybe in the comments. Another question from Natalia. There are so many characteristics of good teacher, and I wonder if an ordinary person can be a good teacher.
You mean by an ordinary person? I don't know any ordinary people. They're all extraordinary. People, you think people, you must allow yourself to be surprised by people, actually. A lot of people say, well, I'm not interesting. Well, I mean, that's kind of condemning yourself, before you even start. You are interesting, everyone is, can't help it.
Mhm.
So I think you have to be very careful of saying things like that. I don't know what a normal person is. And what is ordinary. I write a lot of poetry, and one of the things that poetry teaches you, I think, is that you can find the extraordinary in the ordinary, So I would advise you not to think of yourself as normal or ordinary. You're not.
So, yeah. Another question from Solid. Why is patience an essential quality for a teacher to possess?
Learning doesn't take place because you teach something. You know, input and output are not linked in a direct way. So you may find that you have taught something and you think you've taught it very, very well, and you probably have. The only problem is that they haven't learned it, or they learn something else. And that can provoke a sense of irritation or futility, which manifests itself in impatience. And once you start to show impatience with learners, they turn off. You know, I don't like people being irritable with me, and I don't suppose you do either. And I know the students don't. So you need to be patient because language learning takes time. And everything that you teach is not learned, or not learned when you teach it. It may be learned some other time, or it may never be learned. But you know, you have to go along with that, because if you are kind of take a kind of military disciplinary approach, and you are you show that you are impatient, then that has a negative effect on the whole process. So that's why patience is so important. Think of your own learning. You know, did you learn everything that your teachers taught you at the moment when they taught it? I doubt it very much. I didn't.
And are these, can we learn these? Shilufia is also asking, is it possible to develop presence? Hasn't that got to do with one's personality?
I mean, everybody has a different personality. But I mean, patience is not confined to one kind of personality, I don't think. And if you do have if you think that you have a personality which is perhaps a bit intolerant, then once you're aware of that, it becomes easier not to do it, I think. You know, as I said, these are not things that you can train people necessarily. How do you train people in the art of patience? But being aware that patience is needed, I think, is the first step.
And one final note from you. What are the advice that you can offer to novice teachers, to very beginner teachers? Iman is asking. So, and there are quite a few questions from teachers at the start of their career.
That's a big question. Can we keep it until the end?
Sure, yes. So let's move on then. Thank you so much, Alan, for your...
Can we have the next slide then, please? Okay. So here I'm moving into what we can do about these findings. As I said, you know, a lot of people say you can only acquire these things through experience, and there is some justification for that point of view. What I'm saying is that I don't think that most of these things can be taught, but they can be learned. And that you can facilitate this in various ways. And I'm going to suggest that there are a number of things we can do. There are awareness-raising activities, physical ones, psychological, experiential ones, which we'll look at. There are techniques for developing specific attributes. There are things you can do on your own, and there are things that you can do with the support of other people. So let's have a look at the next slide, which I think, okay, this is just an example. Physical awareness raising. I don't think that training courses in general give enough emphasis on the importance of the physical aspects of teaching. The way you know, when you meet a teacher, when you see a teacher in the classroom, you make up your mind about that teacher. Some people say within 5 seconds. So you've got to be pretty quick off the mark. And what does it depend upon? Well, it depends partly on posture, the way you hold yourself. It's partly on your voice and the way that that communicates who you are. And the voice depends on breathing. Now, most training courses I know of don't do anything about any of these things. So we need to become aware of them. And some ways of doing this are by focusing on peer observation. You know, we can watch somebody that we trust, we work with, and we can visit their class and we can give them feedback on things like, you know, their eye contact, their use of space, how they create, you know, rapport with their students. Another way of doing it is through reflection on videos of lesson sequences with a focus on physical factors, you know, posture, movement, voice, eye contact. John Fanslow, whose work I've referred to before, has a very good technique. He takes very, very short slices of video of classroom events and analyzes it in great detail, because mostly we don't realize what we're doing. We don't know the effect that we're creating. So the whole point here is to become aware of it, because unless you're aware of it, you can't do much about it. So these are a few things on the awareness raising side physically. Can we look at the next slide, please? Here are a number of things that I think we can do on the experiential side, and I'm going to look at some of these in more detail in a moment or two. Using wisdom stories, I'll explain about those in a moment. Anecdotes from other teachers, poems about learning, quotations about learning, metaphors for learning. These are all kind of starters for discussing and thinking about the kind of attributes that I've been talking about so far. Discussing of critical incidents in books. And again, I'll mention more about this in a moment. Just getting together with other people and talking about your own personal experience of learning, negative and positive. Group brainstorming, you know, we're all under stress. Everybody has too much to do. There isn't enough time, and so on and so forth. So what can we change? And what can't we change? Once we know that, it becomes a little bit easier, because we can work on the things that we can change. You can provide mini case studies of anti-models, you know, what not to do. Or you could rerun the teacher questionnaire that I ran twice already and just see what happens, what comes out of that. Let's have the next slide, please. Okay, I talked about wisdom stories. Wisdom stories are fascinating for me. I've just published well, I haven't published it yet, but I'm going to publish a book on this very soon. Basically, wisdom stories are those traditional, mostly traditional stories that come from way back in the Middle East, for example, the Nasruddin stories, or in the Far East, the Zen stories. And here are 3 examples. I won't go into all 3 of them. I'll only go into one of them. I'll do the first one, the Master Archer. So here's the story. Once upon a time, there was a king. He was a very, very good archer, and he'd just been away to a competition which he had won. And he was on his way back, and he stopped in a small town for a drink and a rest. And he happened to look across the street, and he saw there was a long wall. And on the wall, there were, you know, those targets that you fire at with an arrow. And in the middle of each target, there was an arrow, dead center. There are about 10 of them along this. And he thought, my goodness, somebody here is a real expert archer, maybe even better than me. I better find out. So he asked around, and eventually they brought a young lad about 15 years old. And the king said, "Did you fire these arrows?" And the boy said, "Yes, Your Majesty." And the king said, "This is extraordinary. You dead center every time." And the boy said, "Yes." "Show me how you do it," said the king. And so the boy shot an arrow at the wall where there was no target. And then he went into a barn and came out with a pot of paint. And he painted the target around the arrow. And so the arrow was dead center in the target. And the man who was telling this story said, this wise man who was telling the story said, "Well, that's how I teach. First of all, I shoot the arrow. And when I see where it lands, I start to paint the target." Okay, now what can we do with a story like that? Well, there are all sorts of discussion points that come out of it. I mean, what does the man mean at the end? That's the way I teach. Come on, what? What are the implications of this manner of teaching for lesson planning, for instance? Does it mean you don't need any lesson plans? You just shoot off whatever you like? There are a whole load of implications here which you can discuss, and it's the story that releases those reflections, if you like. So wisdom stories are one way. Can we have the next one, please? Yeah, teacher anecdotes I've found are also, these are what I'd call aha moments, when you say, "Ah, now I got it. Ah, now I got it." And Adrian Underhill, whom some of you will know, he tells the story of a demonstration class he was running, which was being observed by Caleb Gattegno. Now, Caleb Gattegno invented something called the silent way, which some of you may know and some of you won't. But his main contention was that you must prioritize learning and not teaching. And so Adrian was running this class, and it was going very well, he thought, everything going smoothly according to the lesson plan and so on. And from the back came this loud voice saying, "Stop teaching." And Adrian has been thinking about that for the last 40 years. Because what does it mean, stop teaching? What are the implications? And again, it's a whole area that you can start discussing. And in discussing it, you are, in a sense, developing your own beliefs and experience. I had a similar experience with Earl Stevick many years ago. I thought I was getting quite good at teaching. I had all these tricks up my sleeve, and I could do all sorts of things, lots of interesting techniques. And then one day I was talking to Earl, and he said, "I think that the job of the teacher is to set things going and then to stand out of the light." And since that actually changed my whole way of approaching teaching, because I started to think, yeah, I'm getting in the way. I should stand out of the light and see what happens. So these are two examples from teacher anecdotes, where again, this can lead to all sorts of interesting discussion about one's own experience of teaching and learning. Yes, could we have the next one, please? Yeah, poems can set off discussion too. This is a very short one that I wrote, and I think it tells you a lot. His voice maintains a steady drone that turns his students' hearts to stone. he coughs and then he clears his throat, then tells his favorite anecdote. Have we all had teachers like this? Yes, probably, I think. And again, it can set off all sorts of speculation and talk about one's own experiences. And that's the whole point of using poems like this. Here's a poem that was written by a Burmese student in Bangkok at the end of a course. And it's quite interesting, his perceptions of the teacher. He says, to a teacher, sometimes behind, not to pull us back, but to catch us when we fall back. Sometimes in front, not to drag us, but to clear the way for us. Sometimes by the side, not to nag along, but for us to lean on. Sometimes above, not to suppress, but to protect. Sometimes below, not to pull us down and make us fall, but to lift us high upon the pedestal. And that I found very interesting, that these were things that he had been observing. And if you think about, again, once again, it can start off a discussion of the kind of teacher qualities that we've been discussing so far. Okay, could we have the next slide, please? Yeah, here's another poem, one of Earl Stevick's, a very interesting one. If you try and pull a stamp off an envelope, you're likely to tear it. But if you hold the stamp and pull the envelope away from it, the stamp will not tear. This really works. Try it sometime. People are like that too. You can take a lot away from me, but if you leave me as I am, but if you leave me as I am, but if you try to pull me away from something I've stuck myself to, it will be very hard for you and very hard on me. I hope you won't forget this next time. So again, this can lead to all sorts of discussion about how you deal with students. Are you trying to pull the stamp off the envelope, as it were, or are you doing it in a more gentle and a more understanding way? So poems can be very powerful mechanisms for getting discussion going. Okay, let's have the next one, please. And here are some of the published poems. I didn't print these off because it's not worth it, but you can look them up yourself. There's one very powerful one by Brian Patton, for example, the Minister for Exams, which is a wonderful poem and will unlock a lot of sentiment about feelings about exams and their purpose and their effects and so on. So there are many published poems, and it's worth making a list of them, in fact, for yourself, for using, both for your own reflection and perhaps for working with trainees. Because I'm not suggesting that all of these things can be done alone. Many of them are better done either in groups or with a mentor of some kind or a trainer. Okay, let's have the next one, please. And these are discussions that you can get going on the basis of quotations. Teaching is at most hoping for the best. That's Prabhu, great Prabhu, wonderful Prabhu. What does he mean? You know, we are being encouraged to think that if we've been trained, then it's not hoping for the best. We know how to do it, but actually, perhaps we don't. And this will bring up all sorts of discussion, which can open up new ideas. Robert Poynton, you know, you can't run everything by improvising, but you can't run anything without it. This raises the whole question again of the predictability of learning, unpredictability, in fact. So quotations too can be used to set off discussion. And next one, please. Metaphors. Metaphors are also very powerful, and inviting trainees to talk about or to derive their own metaphors for various aspects of teaching can be very valuable. I did an article for HLT Mag some time ago now called The Teacher as Circus Performer. And I looked at various metaphors for teachers. The teacher as the ringmaster, for example, controlling everything. The teacher as lion tamer, exerting control by brute force. So the teacher as snake charmer, the teacher as contortionist, or the teacher as strongman, or the teacher as high wire walker, taking all sorts of risks. So you can, again, develop discussion based on metaphors, and I love doing this one. Okay, let's have the next one, please, as time is moving along. Discussions based on extracts from books. And here I want to emphasize the importance, I think, for all of us to read outside the narrow confines of our profession. You know, there's a temptation just to read articles about English language teaching, or to read books about it, or about linguistics. There are plenty of books which can stimulate discussion, which come outside that, much wider reading. Here's one of them. It's called Teacher Man, and it's by Frank McCourt. And you can find a whole number, I've listed some of them here, where you can get very, very interesting discussion going on incidents or on points that are raised in these books. There's I think, a very important book, but hardly anybody has ever read it. It's called Respite for Teachers. And again, there are so many things in there that you can use to start discussion, to start reflection. Let me just cite one from Teacher Man. Teacher Man is set in New York. Frank McCourt is teaching. He just finished training at Columbia Teachers College, and he is teaching in a very rough school with lots of very disruptive teenagers. And he goes into his first class, and there is mayhem happening in the classroom. And he doesn't know quite what to do. And in the middle of all this mayhem, one of the boys throws a sandwich at him. And the sandwich hits him and falls to the floor. And he says, "This is my first pedagogical act, my whole career. What am I going to do?" And so he picks up the sandwich and eats it. And this is an aha moment. You know, this changes the dynamic immediately, because everybody falls silent, except the boy whose sandwich it was, who is indignant. But all of a sudden, the rest of the class is on the teacher's side. And from then on, he can work with them. So just taking, you know, examples of things like this that happen in classrooms and seeing how other people dealt with them can be very illuminating. So these are just some of the books. I have a whole list in the bibliography. Could we move to the next one, please? Okay, so here are a number of hands-on activities that you can do. Impro activities. Impro means improvisation. This is one of the books that I mentioned, Improvise. How do we do improvisation? And that's what the book tells you. Clowning training is another way. This may seem very, very outlandish to you, but I'm talking about clowning in a very particular tradition, theater clowning in Europe. And what does a clown do? Well, a clown waits. for something to happen. And when something happens, he or she reacts to it. And that's what clowns do. And if you have a plan, you will never be a clown, because you have to suspend everything and go in a state of preparedness for anything to happen. And Peter Lutzke, whose book I mentioned here, did a very interesting experiment with Steiner School teachers, where he put them through a clowning course and transformed their lives, because they had never, ever realized just how powerful this was, waiting and then reacting. And of course, it's related to teaching very closely. So that's some of the things you can do. Voice training. I mentioned voice. I wrote a book called The Language Teacher's Voice many years ago now. It seems to me criminal that this is not included in training courses, because actually the voice is something that you can train. And actors, of course, train their voices all the time because they can't afford not to. And yet teachers who use their voices far more than actors do get no training whatsoever. So I think voice training, again, is one of the things that will help to develop a more confident and a more effective teaching persona. Exercise routines for breath and posture, breath control, and so on. Okay. There are a great many things you can do. Fanselo, I mentioned earlier on. Fanselo emphasizes how important it is to notice things and then to do something, not to do something and then notice. And reflective journals are another very important area. The British Council recently published, in fact, a book. It's free online. Teaching English, British Council. If you go to the website, you can download this Reflective Journals by Tom Farrell. And Tom Farrell has spent his whole life working on this idea of reflection, teacher reflection. It's full of sound, practical advice and lots of discussion material. You know, what do you notice when you think back on what you have done? And you really think about it deeply and discuss it. So those are some of the hands-on activities. Next one, please. These are things you can do on your own. And again, you might think this is very fanciful and stupid. Believe me, it is not. I won't tell you how old I am, but if I were not doing some of these things, I would be dead. Meditation. Well, you know, meditation sounds very grand. It doesn't have to be. It's actually a very simple thing. And even if you don't do meditation formally, just finding some quiet time in your day has a very profound effect. You can do things like yoga or Tai Chi, or even just walking. I walk every day for an hour, for example. And I wouldn't know what to do if I didn't do that. Or you can teach yourself a new skill, a new language in particular. You know, we are language teachers. I guess that most of the people who are listening, if they are still listening, will speak more than one language. I mean, that's the rule. Britain is an exception where most people only speak one. But learning a new language is a wonderful way of getting insight into the difficulties that your learners are having. You can do art, you can do music, you can do IT, you can do, you know, learn a new skill and see how learning takes place by observing yourself. Reflective, promiscuous, immersive reading. This is what Gratian, for example, recommends, and it's what I was talking about just now. Read widely. Don't just read within your own small, narrow area. Creative writing is an area that I've explored quite a lot, and I've found that teachers take to it quite well, and that they find that it does actually help in their own development. It gives them enormous confidence in their own use of English, for example, among other things. And it gives them ideas for teaching also. And of course, keeping a journal, which I referred to with Tom Farrell's work. So these are some of the things you can do all by yourself. The next one, please. But this is important. Finding support, finding a mentor. This can be in a formal framework, or it just can be, somebody that you find that is mentoring you, somebody more experienced than you are. It's the Vygotsky idea that you learn from somebody who is slightly ahead of you in your learning. So finding a mentor is important, and this is the most recent book I know of on mentoring by Angie. Find a study buddy, find a friend who you can work with, who you trust and who trusts you, so you can get feedback on your own teaching, because you can learn a lot from what other people see. I think Robert Burns wrote a poem, and one of the lines is, would that some God the gifty gie us to see ourselves as others see us. So actually seeing ourselves as others see us, very important. Even just find a reliable, well-informed friend. In the course of my career life, I've had one or two really, really trusty friends in the same profession, and I learn enormous amounts from them just by having coffee with them, talking informally, exchanging emails with them, talking about problems. For example, I meet Adrian Underhill about 3 or 4 times a year for lunch. It's a very long lunch, usually 4 or 5 hours. And we talk about everything. And it's wonderful, because these are learning conversations. And with a really good friend, you can do that. And you need it. Being on your own, teaching can be a very isolating process. Another way is to join a reading or a discussion circle. Naoko Aoki in Japan has written about this, where you have a small group that meets maybe once a month, once every couple of weeks, and you decide on what you're going to talk about in advance. So everyone comes prepared to talk about that one thing. It may be some kind of teaching problem, it may be a new idea, it may be anything, okay? But everyone is on the same wavelength. That's a very good, important thing. And finally, of course, you can join a professional association or a group. IATEFL in the UK, TESOL in the States. Most countries have a national association, and you can learn an awful lot from that. So I would recommend that too. Can we have the next one, please? Yeah, I just want to, before I stop, don't forget that continuing professional development is for you. You're the one who is developing, not your employer, not somebody else, not the state, not the Ministry of Education. It's you. So you're the one who knows best which steps to take and when to take them. But it is important to take advice, but the decision is ultimately yours, what you do. I've offered you a whole load of things you could do. I'm not suggesting you should do them all, but maybe some of them will tickle your fancy. And finally, as you grow, reach out, help other people grow as well. Cooperation is important in our profession, helping other people, not putting them down. Could we have the next slide, please? Yeah, just a few quotations to finish off with. Timothy Galway wrote a lovely book called The Inner Game of Tennis, which has very little to do with tennis, but everything to do with the game that we play with ourselves. And the others you can read for yourself, but quotations are powerful and they can provoke thinking, which is something we are sometimes short of time for. We have the next, please. And there we are. It's 1 o'clock. And I think we need a little time now for more questions. Am I right?
Yes, yes. Thank you so much, Alan, for your input, insights from your experience. We have received so many questions that we couldn't get to all of them. And thank you so much, our attendees, for your active participation and comments. So I'd like to start one positive comment. Ashkur Rahman has said, "This is the first time I'm seeing an ELT expert referencing from poetry. That's great to see." So this is one comment that I wanted to share with you. And regarding the questions, Khalil asked a question about the change recently, the paradigm shift maybe. What is a good teacher in the artificial intelligence era?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I don't have an answer for it. I think the AI debate is only just starting in a way. And as usual, there is more than one way of looking at it. On one side, it can be seen as a threat because we could all be out of jobs if AI takes over. On the other hand, it can relieve us of a lot of rather tedious and unnecessary work so that we can concentrate more on the kinds of things that I've been talking about here. So I really can't answer your question. If I could, I would be a very rich man, because it is clearly something that's going to impact or is already impacting on everybody, not just in English language teaching, but on every aspect of our existence. But I think as time goes by, we can only hope that we find ways of maximizing the positive and minimizing the negative aspects of it. But thank you for asking the question. I'm sorry I can't give you a better answer.
I think this is a great answer. Thank you, Alan. And Nasser is asking, how can a teacher be non-judgmental?
Well, I mean, non-judgmental again is something, judgmental, I should say, is something which is Janus faced. It has two sides. You can have positive judgment and you can have negative judgment. And when we talk about non-judgmental, usually we're talking about negative. And I think it's relatively easy not to be negatively judgmental. You just have to remind yourself, look, yeah, don't say things that will hurt the person that you're speaking to. I can remember things that were said to me by teachers when I was in primary school. I can still remember them, because these things lodge deep in your head. So I think, provided you are kind of aware of this, it's relatively easy not to do that. You don't say hurtful things. You don't say very negative, don't be so stupid, or things like that, which are very, very hurtful. But there is the positive side of judgmental, of course. You must give credit when credit is due, not excessively praising people, but at least acknowledging that they've done something well. And there are ways of indicating that they have done things not quite so well. you know, but you can do this in a nice way. And I think this is another one of these, you know, fulcrum that you have to navigate. There are no kind of fixed rules for this, but you must develop a sensitivity to it, I think. So that you are, as far as possible, not sending negative messages, which your student will resent and will carry with him or her probably for the rest of their lives. And on the other hand, you mustn't lavish praise on things that don't merit it. So, you know, it's again a question of balance. And I can't teach you how to balance, but I can suggest, you know, what I've just said.
Thank you, Alan. And Gulam is oh, there is another question about the ultimate goal of the teacher in his life. So what should be the ultimate goal of the teacher in her life or in his life?
My goal. Yeah, I mean, yeah, how to stay sane, how to stay motivated, and how to derive pleasure from what you do. I think that's a key thing. You know, a lot of people are obviously are on a career track. So their aim in the teaching is to get as high up as they can. And there's nothing wrong with that, provided it doesn't get in the way of more important things. So if you are, I know of somebody, for instance, I won't mention the country, but a very, very talented primary school teacher who had been teaching in primary school for about 15 years and was talent spotted for the Ministry of Education and was then moved into a kind of administrative role inside the Ministry of Education instead of teaching primary school students. And this person is profoundly unhappy as a result, in spite of the fact that there is more status and there is more money. And the career prospects are better. Career prospects in the sense that from there, you know, one could be promoted still further. So I think there are, you know, as time has gone by, I realize that the most important thing for me is to stay alive. I don't mean physically alive. I mean alive mentally and spiritually and affectively, so that I am, I won't say a happy person because I don't know any happy people, but I'm alive. And I want to stay that way. I want to be interested in things. I want there still to be things to learn. And so I that would be my aim if I were your age. You are undoubtedly younger than I am.
Thank you. Yes, that's very, very helpful, Ellen, to hear your experience. And Rabia is asking about being alive. Why do teachers feel so burnt out so often these days? How to deal with this?
Well, the answer is that they are in fact put under enormous pressures, and you know these things cause what somebody has called cognitive dissonance. Cognitive dissonance. Cognitive dissonance is when you are being asked to do something that you don't believe in. And a lot of the time, I think many teachers, particularly in state systems, not exclusively, but often, are being asked to do things that they feel are counterintuitive or that don't suit them. or that don't serve learning. So that, rigid attachment, for example, to the syllabus and the curriculum and the exam and the textbook, this forces teachers into a pattern of behavior which, many of them don't feel comfortable with. And that causes excessive stress. And then, of course, the sheer amount of time which is required of them. So there are any number of reasons why teachers feel, well, underappreciated, let's say, and also under enormous pressure. Some years ago, I mentioned Rod Blytho just now. Rod Blytho and a man called Patrick Earley, another dear friend, wrote an article called Things to be Cheerful About. And what they did was they looked at all the stress factors that a group of teachers experienced, and they looked at each one of them, and and they decided which ones of these could they do something about, and which ones couldn't they do something about. And the reasons to be cheerful were the ones that they could do something about, and they suggested ways that they could do something about them. And they suggested ways that they could somehow live with the things they couldn't do anything about. And it might be worth finding that article. I could find the reference. I don't have it here. Because I think it's still very relevant. And if you have any opportunity to form a group for informal discussion with other teachers and so on, it might be worth repeating that little thought experiment that they did all those years ago, because there are things that you can do things about, but sometimes you don't realize it until you start to think about it. I'm sorry, I can't give you a fuller answer than that.
That's a very nice approach, actually. And that takes us nicely to the implications for teacher educators. So teacher educators could actually lead teachers or help teachers. So another question I'd like to ask regarding this, based on your views of what teachers need and how teachers learn, this is from one of our audience, but the name is anonymous. So what is your opinion on current teacher education development projects across the world? Do you think these projects are working towards the best preparation of teachers for the learners of tomorrow?
Well, I mean, it's actually an impossible question to answer, because for one thing, I'm ignorant of everything that's happening across the world. The things that bother me slightly are sometimes that so-called teacher development programs or training programs do focus on the knowledge and skills angles. Particularly, they focus on things like testing and assessment, for instance, or they focus on curriculum, or they focus on syllabus change and so on. And these are very worthy things to concentrate on. But relatively few of them, I think, are doing the kinds of things that I've been talking about today. So my short answer would be, I mean, I'm sure that all of any teacher development program anywhere is based on justifiable beliefs and on values that are shared. But what worries me a little bit is that, people run away with fads and fancies sometimes. Technology is one of them. And obviously technology is part of the DNA of virtually everybody now, except for people like me. And technology alone is not the answer, so you've got to think about other things too. Claire Cramch, who some of you will know, once very wisely said, there are two ways of looking at technology or a technological advance. One is to say, here's a nice technological advance. Now let's see what we can do with it. And she said, no, that is the wrong question. The question is, here is a pedagogical problem. What is the appropriate technology we can use to solve it?
Okay.
So, you know, I would like to see a more critical view of things like technology, like testing. I mean, testing, well, I say testing, I'm thinking about evaluation, let's say. I think that needs to be looked at very, very carefully again. And likewise with materials development. All of these areas which tend to be the focus of various programs across the world, I think do need a critical look.
Mm-hmm.
And one hopes that they will get one.
Well, thank you so much, Alan. Well, you have touched upon so many important areas, and we hope our colleagues found the session useful. And I'm sure we all picked up useful ideas, inspiration to reflect in our teaching classrooms and training sessions. So thank you very much once again. And I'd like to thank our audience once again for their active participation and contributions. And just to finally remind you, the recording of the webinar will be available on Teaching English in the next couple of days. And the link to the certificate will be provided in the thank you email that you'll receive tomorrow. And thank you. Thank you so much once again, Ellen. So
Thank
it's been
you.
pleasure to have you with us. And colleagues, our next webinar will be on gender equality in English language teaching, practical insights for teacher educators on 4th of June. And yes, you will see the link on Teaching English and in the next couple of days in the follow-up email as well.
Could I just thank, first of all, thank the British Council for inviting me to do this, and thank everybody who managed to survive until the end of my session. And thanks to Cillian for introducing me, and to Andrea for being patient with the technological aspects of the presentation. So thank you to everybody.
Thank you, Helen. Hope to see you in our future sessions.
Thank you.